The night is thin and cold, but inside the small perimeter of our workspace, the air feels heavy, almost stagnant. We sit in the dark, illuminated only by the sterile, blue-white fluorescence of a single laptop screen. Outside the window, a world is quietly turning. The seasons are performing their ancient, unprompted choreography. Autumn leaves drop without defense, rain falls onto the dark pavement. With a rhythmic, indifferent patter, the earth breathes in long, cold sighs that we have long since forgotten how to hear. Inside this room, however, time does not flow like a river, it ticks like a metronome. The only sound cutting through the silence is the dry, mechanical click of keys being struck in rapid succession, a frantic Morse code sent into the digital void. We are waiting for something. We are always waiting for the moment when we can finally stop. Our smartphone rests beside our hand, its screen occasionally flashing to life with a silent, vibrating hum, delivering invitations, demands, and updates from an invisible network that never sleeps. Each flash sends a subtle electric jolt through our nervous system, a tiny spike of adrenaline that keeps us anchored to the edge of our seat. We are trapped in a strange paradox of the modern age. We are completely connected to everything, yet deeply, painfully isolated from the immediate reality of our own living flesh. We have all signed an invisible contract, a silent, binding agreement that shapes every hour of our waking lives. The contract states that our peace is a luxury, a reward to be collected only after the final item on our list has been crossed off. We tell ourselves that once this project is complete, once this email is sent, once this financial milestone is reached, we will finally allow our lungs to expand fully. We will finally step outside, look at the sky, and taste the raw texture of being alive. But the finish line is a ghost. Every time we approach it, the boundary moves. The list does not shrink, it mutates. For every task we strike through, 3 more sprout in its place, like the heads of a mythological beast that thrives on our exhaustion. We find ourselves running a race where the track loops back on itself eternally, and yet we run faster, believing that sheer velocity will eventually grant us liberation. We look at our calendars not as spaces for living, but as grids to be filled, battlegrounds where time must be conquered, managed, and exploited. Let us look closer at what we are doing to ourselves in this very moment. We are holding our breath. It is a shallow, restricted movement confined strictly to the upper chest, as if we are afraid that taking a deep abdominal breath would cause the fragile tower of our productivity to collapse. Our shoulders have migrated upward, creeping toward our ears like shields raised against an impending blow. There is a dull, radiating ache in the trapezius muscles, a physical accumulation of unexecuted plans, unanswered messages, and unfulfilled desires. We carry our schedules in our skin. We wear our deadlines like an invisible suit of armor that grows heavier with each passing hour. If we pay close attention to the small space between our teeth, we will find that our jaw is clenched, locked tight in a subconscious effort to maintain control over a world that feels increasingly volatile and unpredictable. Even now, as we read these words, our fingertips are cold, the blood drawn away from our extremities and channeled to our brain, because our physiology believes we are constantly being hunted. We are not being chased by a predator in the forest, we are being hunted by our own expectations. We have become citizens of a strange kingdom where doing has completely eradicated being. We measure our worth by our output, assessing the value of our days by how much we have produced, how many problems we have solved, and how much closer we have gotten to an idealized version of ourselves that exists only in the distant future. We look at the present moment not as a home, but as a stepping stone, a friction-filled obstacle that stands between us and the next achievement. If we are walking through the park, our mind is already in the boardroom. If we are sitting at dinner with those we love, our eyes are glazed over with the mental imagery of tomorrow's spreadsheet. We are never truly where our feet are. We have fragmented our attention into 1,000 tiny shards, scattering them across past regrets and future anxieties, leaving only a hollow, exhausted shell to inhabit the actual, living second that is unfolding right now. This is the shared landscape of our modern collective existence. We are high-performing, deeply educated, and entirely spent. We wake up already in a deficit, checking our devices before our eyes have even adjusted to the morning light, immediately flooding our consciousness with the demands of the outer world. We begin the day with a sense of being perpetually behind, a chronic feeling of inadequacy that whispers that we have not done enough, we do not have enough, and therefore we are not enough. We have mistaken movement for progress and speed for alignment. We watch the natural world outside our windows transition from the vibrant green of summer to the stark skeletal beauty of winter, and it feels like a movie playing on a distant screen, totally disconnected from the urgent, artificial reality we have constructed within our minds. We must ask ourselves, who are we when the screen goes black? Who are we when the notifications cease, when the office grows quiet, and we are left alone with the rhythm of our own heartbeats? The thought of that emptiness often terrifies us. When the stimulation drops to zero, a subtle panic sets in, a creeping existential dread that we try to immediately suppress by reaching for another task, another podcast, another digital interaction. We have forgotten how to sit with the uncarved block of time. We have lost our tolerance for the spacious, unscripted intervals of life. We treat an open hour as a vacancy that must be filled, rather than a sanctuary to be savored. In doing so, we have built a beautiful, highly efficient prison, and we have become both the inmate and the guard, pacing the floor of our daily routines, checking the locks, and wondering why we feel so profoundly empty despite our long list of accomplishments. We are gathered here in this shared reflection because the old way of living is no longer sustainable. The body is beginning to rebel, the mind is fraying at the edges, the soul is crying out for a cessation of hostilities. We cannot continue to treat our lives as an endless series of problems to be solved. We cannot keep treating our own bodies as machines to be optimized for maximum efficiency. There is deeper, older wisdom that waits for us just beneath the surface of this frantic activity. A perspective that does not demand that we achieve more, but asks us to drop the heavy burden of the illusion of completion. We are about to step onto a path of radical looking, a journey that requires no luggage, no credentials, and no plans. It requires only our willingness to stop running, to lower our shields, and to look directly into the waters of our own experience, discovering the underlying architecture of the trap we have built, and learning how to step through the open door that has been there all along, to understand how we became so thoroughly trapped in this cycle of endless performance. We must look at the modern archetype of the chronic achiever persona that many of us wear so naturally that we have forgotten it is a mask. Consider the person who wakes up at dawn, not because their body is rested, but because an internal alarm, driven by an ambient panic, dictates that the day is already slipping away. This is the individual who steps into the world with an invisible scorecard tucked into their mind, ready to grade every interaction, every email, and every minute of silent space. For this person, and for so many of us, a day where nothing is produced or checked off is not a day of rest, it is a day of moral failure. We have normalized a state of existence where our inner value is completely contingent upon our outer output, creating a relentless psychological momentum that carries us from one task to the next without a single moment of genuine arrival. If we trace this momentum down into the physical architecture of our bodies, we can observe the precise biological toll of this lifestyle. When we live with a mind that is constantly projecting into the next hour, trying to solve a problem that hasn't even occurred yet, our nervous system undergoes a profound transformation. The body does not know the difference between a real physical threat and an imaginary deadline. It responds to an unread email with the exact same chemistry it would use to respond to a predator. We can feel this in the way our shoulders continuously creep upward toward our ears, forming a rigid, defensive posture as if we are constantly ducking beneath a low ceiling. This chronic tightness in the trapezius and neck muscles is not merely the result of poor ergonomics at a desk. It is the physical calcification of our unexecuted plans, a somatic storage house for the infinite obligations we believe we must carry alone. As this tension settles into the upper torso, our breathing naturally shifts. Instead of the deep, nourishing, abdominal breaths that signal safety to our brain, our breath becomes shallow, rapid, and restricted entirely to the rib cage. This thoracic breathing creates a subtle, continuous feedback loop of anxiety. The brain receives the message that breath is scarce, which triggers the release of more stress hormones, which in turn makes our thoughts even more frantic and hypervigilant. We may notice a persistent flutter in the solar plexus, a coldness in our hands and feet, as our blood is redirected to our major muscles for a fight that never comes, and a subconscious clenching of the jaw that persists even through our sleep, grinding away the structural integrity of our teeth as we attempt to chew through our mental burdens in our dreams. This physical state is the direct consequence of interacting with what we can call the bottomless reservoir. We live under the psychological illusion that our lives are a container that can be filled to the brim with achievements, accolades, credentials, and checked boxes. We tell ourselves that if we just push hard enough this week, if we just clear out the inbox, if we just finalize this one contract, the reservoir will finally be full, and we will be allowed to sit by its banks and rest. But the structural reality of this reservoir is that it is cracked at the very base by design. Every drop of validation we pour into it, every completed task, every promotion, every word of praise from a colleague drains out almost instantly through the bottom. The temporary feeling of relief we experience upon crossing an item off our list is not true peace. It is merely the brief cessation of anxiety. Within minutes, the emptiness returns, and the mind immediately demands a new drop of achievement to keep the underlying sense of insufficiency at bay. We see this pattern play out vividly when we observe the way we handle our daily transitions. When we finish a major project, instead of paused reflection or celebration, there is an immediate, almost compulsive urge to check the phone, to open a new tab, to find the next fire to put out. The mind cannot tolerate the stillness that follows completion, because in that stillness, the voice of our deepest insecurity grows louder. It whispers that our worth is only as good as our last performance, that if we stop moving, we will become irrelevant, and that someone else, somewhere out there, is working harder, moving faster, and achieving more. We have become addicted to the friction of striving, because the alternative confronting the vast, open space of who we are without our titles and tasks feels entirely too terrifying to face. This constant orientation toward the future creates a profound alienation from our own immediate sensory experience. We can eat an entire meal without tasting a single bite, our minds completely preoccupied with an argument we anticipate having tomorrow. We can walk through a beautiful forest in the middle of spring, completely blind to the color of the flowers and deaf to the sound of the birds, because our internal landscape is cluttered with a chaotic storm of digital data and administrative logistics. We are effectively living as ghosts, haunting our own lives rather than inhabiting them, treating the only moment we will ever actually have living present as an inconvenient obstacle that must be hurried through to get to a better, more perfect future. The tragic irony of this condition is that the harder we fight to control reality through our frantic productivity, the more fragmented and out of control we feel. We become fragile, easily triggered by the smallest disruptions to our schedule. A delayed train, a slow internet connection, or an unexpected phone call feels like an existential assault rather than a routine occurrence of human life. We respond with a surge of irritability and resentment, lashing out at those around us, or retreating into a cold, defensive silence. Our relationships suffer because we no longer have the capacity to truly listen. We are simply waiting for the other person to stop talking so we can get back to our work. Or we are secretly calculating how much time this conversation is costing us. We have allowed our lives to be hijacked by an aggressive, imperialistic efficiency that leaves no room for mystery, no room for spontaneity, and no room for love. When we sit quietly and look at the sheer exhaustion written into our faces, we begin to realize that this is not a sustainable way to exist as a human being on this earth. We are running ourselves into the ground to maintain an illusion, sacrificing our health, our peace, and our capacity for genuine connection on the altar of an imaginary completion that will never arrive. The reservoir cannot be filled from the outside, no matter how much water we pour into it. To find true liberation from this exhaustion, we must stop looking for better ways to manage our time or optimize our energy, and instead begin to question the fundamental premise upon which our entire lives have been built. We must gather the courage to look directly into the mechanics of our own minds, to understand why we are so terrified of stopping, and to explore the ancient wisdom that offers a radical alternative to this endless, self-inflicted warfare. As we pause in the heavy stillness of our shared exhaustion, a deeper, more unsettling question begins to emerge from the shadows of our striving. We must ask ourselves what exactly we are defending when we build these towering fortresses of productivity. Who is this entity that feels so chronically inadequate, so permanently behind, and so desperately in need of validation? When we examine the raw anatomy of our daily anxiety, we discover that the true source of our suffering is not the length of our to-do list, nor is it the demanding nature of our modern workplaces. The true source is a profound and subtle case of mistaken identity. We have constructed a rigid, fictional portrait of who we think we ought to be: flawless, infinitely capable imperial ego that never tires, never fails, and never stops. And we spend every waking hour of our lives punishing our actual living, breathing selves for failing to live up to that impossible ghost. To truly understand the mechanics of this self-inflicted warfare, we can look to an ancient psychological insight regarding the nature of human pain. When an event occurs in our lives, whether it is an unexpected delay, an overwhelming influx of new demands, or the simple reality of an unfinished task at once we are struck by an inevitable event. This initial experience is simply the reality of being a finite human being living in a complex, interconnected universe. It is the physical sensation of tiredness, the objective truth of a clock ticking forward, or the material limitation of having only 2 hands and 24 hours in a day. This is the first impact, a natural condition of existence that carries its own organic friction but contains no inherent suffering. However, almost instantaneously, our modern minds perform a highly destructive act of psychological alchemy. We do not merely experience the unfinished task, we immediately launch a second, far more devastating impact into our own hearts. This second impact is the elaborate, cruel commentary we construct about the event. It is the internal voice that transforms a simple, unread message into a defining indictment of our character. It whispers that because we did not finish everything today, we are fundamentally lazy, we are losing our edge, or we are destined to fail. This second impact is entirely self-inflicted. It is the ego acting simultaneously as the ruthless prosecutor, the biased judge, and the suffering inmate within the courtroom of our own consciousness. We are not bleeding from the demands of the world, we are bleeding from the weapon we have turned upon ourselves. Let us look closely at how this second impact operates within our bodies in the very moments we feel overwhelmed. When a new obligation lands on our desk, the first impact is just the sensory data of the request. But the second impact arrives as a tight, visceral knot in the pit of our stomach, a sudden heat rising into our throat, and a rapid, frantic racing of our thoughts. This bodily distress is not caused by the task itself. It is caused by the terrifying narrative that we have attached to it. We tell ourselves that if we do not conquer this challenge immediately, our entire survival is at stake. The ego convinces us that our safety, our worth, and our right to exist on this earth are directly tied to our performance. Therefore, every minor administrative delay becomes a life-or-death struggle, a chaotic battleground where we must exhaust our life force just to stay afloat. This relentless drive for completion is rooted in a massive existential delusion, the illusion that we can somehow domesticate reality. The to-do list is not merely an organizational tool. It is a subconscious psychological strategy designed to force a wild, unpredictable, and infinitely fluid universe into neat, predictable bullet points. The ego craves certainty. It desperately wants to believe that if it can just check off enough boxes, it will finally achieve a static, permanently secure state of safety where nothing can ever hurt us or catch us off guard again. But this desire runs completely counter to the fundamental nature of the universe. The world we inhabit is characterized by a beautiful, unyielding, and absolute impermanence. Everything is in a constant state of flux, shifting, dissolving, and recreating itself in every single millisecond. Trying to find ultimate security by completing a static list of tasks is like trying to build a fortress out of flowing water. When we refuse to accept this fundamental fluid nature of reality, we create an immense, exhausting friction within our own minds. We become like a swimmer trying desperately to build a permanent home in the middle of a raging river, screaming at the current because it refuses to stop moving. Every time a new task arrives unbidden or an unexpected crisis disrupts our meticulously planned schedule, we experience it as an unfair violation, a personal attack on our peace. We do not see that the disruption is the nature of life itself. The inbox will never be completely empty, because the inbox is a reflection of a living, breathing world that is constantly interacting with us. To expect a state of total completion before we allow ourselves to rest is to demand that the entire universe stop turning just so we can feel safe. This insight reveals the profound emptiness of the ego's promises. The ego tells us that fulfillment lies at the end of the journey, just past the next horizon of achievement. But when we strip away the illusions, we see that the ego is actually a parasite that thrives on our perpetual dissatisfaction. It cannot afford to let us arrive in the present moment, because the moment we truly arrive, the moment we drop our tools, relax our jaw, and breathe completely into the now, the illusion of the separate, striving ego completely dissolves. It requires our chronic anxiety to sustain its own fictional existence. It keeps us running on the treadmill of achievement, because if we ever step off, we might realize that the entity we have been working so hard to protect and glorify does not actually exist as a solid, permanent self. It is merely a collection of passing thoughts, temporary conditions, and borrowed titles. By deeply observing this inner theater, we can begin to witness the sheer absurdity of our conditioning. We are sacrificing the only real, tangible thing we possess, the vibrant, living texture of the present, second for the sake of a conceptual phantom called the future. We are treating our precious, irreplaceable days as mere raw material to be burned as fuel for an idealized tomorrow that never actually arrives as anything other than another today. We are like artists who spend their entire lives frantically preparing a canvas, sharpening brushes, and mixing paints, but who pass away without ever having allowed a single brushstroke of actual color to touch the surface. This realization is not meant to plunge us into despair, but to offer us the first taste of a radical, breathtaking liberation. The moment we recognize that the second impact is entirely our own creation, we also realize that we possess the immediate power to stop firing it. We do not need to alter the external world, we do not need to change our jobs, and we do not need to miraculously clear our schedules to find peace. The door to our freedom does not lie at the end of the list, it lies in our altered relationship to the list right now. We can begin to look at the unread messages, the incomplete projects, and the chaotic demands of our lives, not as terrifying threats to our existential safety, but simply as the natural, vibrant scenery of a world in motion. We can learn to stand completely still in the absolute center of the storm, recognizing that our completeness is already entirely intact, prior to any action we could ever perform, and that we have absolutely nothing to prove to a phantom that we ourselves invented. The realization that we have been the authors of our own internal warfare marks the beginning of a profound architectural shift. We are no longer required to be the builders of a leaking, bottomless reservoir, nor must we remain the weary soldiers defending a fictional citadel of productivity. The question that lies before us now is not how to manage our time more efficiently, but how to change the very structure of our internal space. To do this, we must learn the delicate craft of transforming our minds from a rigid, grasping fist into an open, welcoming vessel. This transformation does not ask us to abandon our work, to neglect our responsibilities, or to escape into a perpetual sanctuary of isolation. Instead, it invites us to fundamentally alter the internal posture from which we engage with every action, every decision, and every single unread notification that enters our sphere of awareness. This process begins at the foundational level of our biology, for the mind and the body are not two separate entities, but a single, continuous loop of experience. When we notice the familiar current of urgency rising within us, the sudden tightening of the chest, the elevation of the shoulders, the rapid acceleration of our internal narrative, must introduce a deliberate, conscious interruption. This is the practice of establishing a somatic baseline. Instead of allowing our attention to be entirely consumed by the flashing demands of a digital screen, we intentionally drop our awareness downward, landing it heavily into the center of the diaphragm. We allow the belly to soften completely, expanding outward with every inhalation and releasing fully with every exhalation. By consciously lengthening the breath, making the exhalation slightly longer than the inhalation, we send a profound neurobiological signal to our deep nervous system. We are telling our ancient, survival-driven brain that despite the mountain of unfinished work, there is no physical predator in the room. We are safe. We are allowed to inhabit this square inch of earth without defense. As the physical baseline stabilizes, we can begin to expand the perimeter of our awareness. When we are caught in the grip of the bottomless reservoir, our attention becomes hyper-focused, narrowing down into a sharp, laser-like beam that perceives only the immediate problem or the upcoming task. This narrow focus creates a psychological claustrophobia, making every administrative detail feel incredibly heavy and monumental. To break this spell, we must practice the art of spacious looking. While our eyes may remain resting on the screen or the paperwork before us, we intentionally expand our peripheral awareness to include the entire environment. We sense the physical weight of our body pressing down into the chair. We notice the precise texture of the air against our skin. We become aware of the distant sounds traveling through the window, the hum of traffic, the rustle of leaves, the quiet murmur of a passing conversation. In doing so, we break the monopoly that the task holds over our consciousness. We realize that the unread email is not the entire universe, it is merely a tiny passing phenomenon taking place within a vast, infinitely accommodating space of living reality. With this expanded awareness, we can begin to retrain our relationship to action itself, moving away from the mechanics of exhaustion and toward a state of effortless execution. In our old way of living, every action was performed with a heavy sense of personal ownership and cosmic stakes. We were not merely writing a report, we were validating our existence as a human being. We were not merely resolving a conflict, we were defending our fragile self-worth. To untangle ourselves from this trap, we must practice performing action without demanding completion as an existential rescue. We can learn to treat our daily tasks not as heavy stones we must carve our names into, but as footprints left gently in water. When a footprint is made in water, the impression is perfectly clear for a brief second, but the moment the foot is lifted, the water returns to its natural, unblemished stillness, leaving no scar, no memory, and no residue. To apply this practically in our chaotic modern environments, we must introduce the discipline of the clean transition. When we finish a particular task, whether it is sending an important email, concluding a challenging phone call, or finishing a meeting, we do not immediately rush into the next item on our list. Instead, we introduce a conscious boundary of absolute emptiness. We close our eyes for the duration of 3 full breaths. During these 3 breaths, we do absolutely nothing. We do not review what we just did. We do not anticipate what we must do next, and we do not check our devices for validation. We allow the mental residue of the previous task to dissolve completely back into the spacious sky of awareness, restoring our nervous system to a clean, neutral slate. We treat each task as a self-contained universe, entering it fully, executing it elegantly, and then dropping it completely the moment it is finished. This clean transition allows us to cultivate a radical quality of presence known as action from wholeness, rather than action from scarcity. When we act from scarcity, we are always trying to get somewhere else. We are treating the present task as a miserable obstacle that must be overcome so we can claim a future reward. When we act from wholeness, however, the task itself becomes the final destination. If we are washing a dish, the total fulfillment of our life is contained within the movement of the sponge and the warmth of the water. If we are composing a message, the ultimate purpose of our existence is expressed through the clarity of the words we choose. We no longer look past the moment, we inhabit it so completely that the frantic, striving ego is temporarily forgotten, replaced by a deep, resonant flow of spontaneous intelligence. The work is still done, often with far greater precision and creativity. But the worker is no longer consumed by the flames of anxiety. As we deepen this practice, we will inevitably encounter the fierce resistance of our old conditioning. The ghost of efficiency will return, whispering that we are wasting precious time, that these small pauses are an unaffordable luxury, and that we must return to our hyper-vigilant pace if we wish to survive. When these thoughts arise, we must not fight them, suppress them, or judge ourselves for having them. Instead, we learn to greet them as interesting, passing clouds in the sky of our mind. We observe the thought of urgency without becoming the urgency. We say to ourselves, with immense gentleness, "There is the thought that I am falling behind. There is the old pattern trying to drag me back into the bottomless reservoir." By simply witnessing the thought rather than obeying it, we rob it of its dictatorial power. We recognize that a thought of urgency is not a fact, it is merely a temporary wave of nervous energy passing through our system. And we possess the sovereign capacity to let it rise, peak and break without moving a single muscle in response. Furthermore, this internal training requires us to establish a sacred, unyielding boundary around the direct experience of our living days. We must learn the profound spiritual discipline of saying a clean, dignified no to the insatiable demands of artificial optimization. We must declare certain spaces and times in our lives as completely unmarketable, completely unmonetized, and entirely free from the metrics of achievement. We must give ourselves permission to take a walk for the absolute sake of the walk itself. To sit on a bench and watch the sun go down without needing to document it. To read a book simply because it stirs our soul, or to spend an hour staring at the rain without feeling the need to justify it as rest for future productivity. We must reclaim our right to be ordinary, to be quiet, and to be entirely useless to the machinery of modern efficiency. This is the architecture of the open vessel mind that no longer clings to outcomes, no longer panics at the sight of an unfinished list, and no longer mistakes its structural completeness for external validation. We begin to understand that an unfinished list is not a symptom of human failure, but a beautiful, vibrant testament to a life that is actively, courageously interacting with a wild and demanding world. We stop trying to freeze the river of reality into a permanent, predictable shape. We lower our shields, loosen our grip, and allow the infinite currents of life to flow through us without resistance, discovering that we do not need to finish everything to be entirely whole, and that the deep peace we have been hunting for across 1,000 future horizons has been waiting quietly for us, right here, in the very breath we are taking in this exact moment. The long, turbulent storm of our striving begins to pass, leaving behind a sky that is clear, vast, and entirely unblemished. As we step out of the frantic mechanism of the bottomless reservoir and stabilize ourselves within the architecture of the open vessel, a profound and unfamiliar quietude settles over our entire existence. We can feel this transformation directly within the physical borders of our own flesh. The rigid, defensive armor that we carried for decades across our shoulders and neck finally dissolves, allowing the muscles to drop into a state of natural, unforced ease. Our jaw unclenches completely, releasing the ancient, stored survival tension that kept us locked in a state of perpetual combat with time. The breath, which had been restricted for so long to the shallow, suffocating chambers of the upper chest, now moves down deeply into the abdomen, flowing with the smooth, rhythmic elegance of a calm ocean tide. We are no longer breathing to survive the next hour, we are breathing to inhabit the infinite richness of the immediate present. When we look around our immediate environment from this newly uncovered ground, we discover that nothing in the external world has fundamentally altered, yet everything has been completely transfigured. The desk is still covered with paperwork. The digital inbox still contains messages waiting for a response, and the clock on the wall continues its steady, indifferent march through the day. But these objects have lost their power to terrify or diminish us. They are no longer aggressive predators, threatening our existential safety or demanding that we prove our worth through their completion. They are simply things passing through a field of awareness, like gentle birds flying across an empty sky or small leaves floating down a quiet stream. We see the world as it actually is, free from the distorted, panic-driven commentary of the separate ego. We are finally standing completely still in the absolute center of our own lives, experiencing the profound, radiant stillness that arises when we stop trying to fix, optimize, or escape who we are. This state of liberation is not a cold, detached indifference to the world. It is a warm, vibrantly alive presence that allows us to participate in the human experience with an unprecedented level of clarity and joy. Because we are no longer using our energy to chase after a phantom completion in the future, we have an immense, overflowing abundance of attention to offer to the living now. When we listen to a colleague or a loved one, we are no longer calculating the time the conversation is costing us or waiting impatiently for them to stop talking. We are holding a vast, uncompromised space for them to exist, hearing not just their words but the deep shared hum of their humanity. When we engage in our work, we do so with a light, playful touch, executing each task with the meticulous craftsmanship of an artist who creates for the sheer joy of creation, rather than a prisoner who labors to earn their freedom. We have stepped off the treadmill of accumulation and entered the sacred current of authentic being. As we rest within this spacious interior landscape, we are reminded of the profound, timeless truth that was left as a final legacy for all of humanity. The understanding that our intrinsic completeness has never been compromised by the world. We spent years running across endless horizons, exhausting our minds and bodies to build a reservoir that could never hold water, believing that peace was a trophy to be won at the end of a long and brutal race. But the truth is far more beautiful and radical than the ego could ever comprehend. The peace we were hunting for was never a destination, it was the very ground upon which we were running. The freedom we sought was not something to be manufactured through our frantic productivity, but a birthright to be remembered the moment we simply chose to stop. We are already the vast sky we do not need to collect the clouds to prove our existence. The screen before us begins to fade, and the room returns to its soft, natural shadows. But the internal clarity we have cultivated remains entirely undisturbed, a steady, self-sustaining hearth that will guide us through whatever storms the modern world may bring. We are no longer victims of the unfinished to-do list, because we have recognized that a life in motion is always incomplete on paper, yet always entirely perfect in its immediate, living essence. We can move forward into our days with a soft heart, an open hand, and a deeply grounded sovereignty, knowing that we have absolutely nothing to prove, nothing to defend, and nothing to hide. We are here, we are awake, and we are finally home within ourselves. As we prepare to step back into the flow of our daily routines, carrying this radiant stillness into the noise and demands of the world, let us hold a single, quiet inquiry within the deepest chamber of our awareness, letting it resonate without the need for an immediate answer. Who are we in this exact second, when we finally give ourselves unconditional permission to leave the list unfinished and simply allow ourselves to be?